So we're now moving into everything L-band. GPS satellites, economics, aviation, satellite communications, weather, and more. And our moderator will be Ann Keeney, a vice president at the Glen Echo Group. And Ann's, she'll introduce the rest of the panel, but somebody should introduce Ann. And that's my job. So she's a vice president with the Glen Echo Group, and she helps organizations in the technology, telecom, and satellite industries tell their stories with sharp messaging and smart strategy. She's run several award-winning coalitions and campaigns that make kind of wonky policy issues understandable, relevant, and interesting to policymakers, regulators, industry, and media. Prior to joining the Glen Echo Group, Ann worked for AMGA, where she managed a diabetes communications campaign that helped improve care for more than 1 million Americans. A native Washingtonian, Ann graduated summa cum laude from the University of Notre Dame, go Irish, and a degree in political science, and earned her master's in public relations and corporate communications from Georgetown University. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much, and hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today to this panel discussion. So this is everything L-band, GPS satellite, economics, aviation, satellite communications, weather, and more, exclamation point. And as that title suggests, we'll be getting into the various use cases, as well as questions about interference in the L-band. You can see our visual here of the L-band. So a note on who we are as a panel. All of your panelists today are users of the spectrum. And to be clear, so are all of you, and you may not know it yet. Their interest in this technology is keen because their organizations rely on the L-band every day. So this will be less of a technical conversation and a bit more of a practical one about the uses of the L-band in each of these industries. So let's start with some introductions. Will each of you go ahead and give a little bit of your background about yourself and your organizations?
Sure, I'll start. Hi, my name is Kara Leibin Azocar. I work for Iridium as Vice President Regulatory. I've only spent a couple weeks there so far, but I have a background in spectrum policy. For almost 15 years, I've worked for a variety of different industry players in spectrum policy, including media, wireless companies, and also cable companies. So I take a pretty holistic approach because I've represented both incumbents and those that are interested in the spectrum itself for new uses.
Great, thank you. My name is Lisa Dyer, and I wanted to just thank everyone for the opportunity to represent the GPS Innovation Alliance here. We are the voice of the GPS industry. Our members and affiliates employ hundreds of thousands of people and generate billions of dollars in revenue due to the GPS-driven technologies and services that they provide. My background's very diverse. I started first in the Air Force, working on satellite data dissemination, moved over to the State Department, and in the past 5 years, I've been in San Francisco working at a nonprofit on AI, and I have been working at a startup, a technology-driven startup. So thank you again, and I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you and my fellow panelists.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Sidor. I am the Aircraft Design and Operations Group Chairman for the Airline Pilots Association in the Air Safety Organization. We represent approximately 69,000 pilots at 39 airlines, soon to be 40 airlines as we're in the final stages of merger with Air Canada, where we will represent close to 75,000 pilots. For my full-time job, I'm a pilot for United Airlines on the Airbus A320, where I'm a simulator instructor as well. Previously, I've flown international cargo on the 747 around the world, also flown small regional jets, and I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak today.
Good afternoon, and my name is Renee Leduc. I own a consultancy called Narayan Strategy, which is focused on weather, climate, and aerospace policy based in Arlington, Virginia. I come to this work on Spectrum, and I happen to be a member of all of the NSMA board, following a decade of work inside of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, most recently serving as basically a senior advisor on really environmental satellite policy and procurement to two past NOAA administrators. I'm really most excited about all of my work inside of really the weather and climate communities when I can facilitate more effective communication between the various players inside of really the DC policy process, whether that's with scientists, engineers, staff in Congress, regulatory officials, as well as certainly executive branch officials. And I have a very handsome beagle named Dixon.
Most importantly. So let's get into it. So while most Americans may not realize it, virtually everyone benefits from GPS, satellite communications, and critical weather system services. So we're going to get into questions about interference later, but let's just start with how each of your industries in particular uses the L-band.
Should I go first again?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, Iridium has a satellite constellation. It's a NGSO, low Earth orbit satellite constellation. There are 66 satellites. It's used for critical communications capabilities and has for over 20 years. There are about 2 million global subscribers, and it is the only truly global coverage, so reaching over oceans, polar regions, areas that may be impacted by war or political turmoil or natural disasters. We use, as you can see in the visual, only 9 megahertz of spectrum, which is, for what I'm describing, a very spectrally efficient use within the L-band. And we use it in a pretty unique way, so it makes it difficult to share next to our band, right next to our band, and having guard bands is really critical to that, and having an interference-free environment. The end users are worldwide, and it's mobile, and it's over a large coverage area. We use small user terminals, and the antennas are very small and need to radiate to receive signals in all directions. So at any given moment, anywhere you are with open sky, every 4 to 11 minutes, an Iridium satellite will come by and provide coverage. So truly global. Yeah, I think I covered everything.
Great. We too care about clean and interference-free spectrum. I want to emphasize right from the start that GPS is one of the most innovative and transformative technologies that the US government has ever developed and operated. And let me talk a little bit about how these signals have accelerated public safety. I'll let Chris talk about that a lot, but also promoting resilience in the US economy. Most of us are very familiar with how the military and intelligence services have used GPS. There's been some incredible videos, et cetera, that have shown how they promote national security. I would bet anybody in this room, including Dixon, who's not in this room, has had GPS, using the location and navigation services on your phone. And those actually bring environmental savings. If you can get to the latest endpoint at the most efficient way, whether it's to get to your destination or the companies that are delivering goods and services to your home or other companies, it's generating environmental savings. I want to give just a few examples, though, of areas where people may not be aware of GPS's tremendous impact. First of all, banking transactions are synchronized because of the GPS timing signal, and that allows us to be confident in our banking transactions, which is huge for the confidence of the global economies. Safe, accident-free travel and transportation on those systems that we all rely upon is extraordinarily important and extraordinarily reliant on GPS. And then precision agriculture is a GPS-driven technology. This increases food security globally, and it generates savings for those farmers, both in the water usage as well as fertilizer. So how does this all translate? It translates into hundreds of thousands of jobs and safe travel and transportation, ambulances getting to your door to take care of your friends and loved ones who need it. It's an extraordinarily impactful technology, and I'm excited to be a part of it and to represent the companies that are a part of it.
So at the Airlines Pilot Association, our motto is schedule with safety. Everything we do is ensuring that we are having a safe air transportation system in the United States and throughout the world. Since 2009, the airlines have carried 11 billion passengers with only 2 passenger fatalities in that period. In the meantime, we've had a 99.8 reduction in the passenger fatality rate. A lot of this is due to the improvements in the technology that come from the L-band through GPS and through different navigation and communication systems. The aviation industry touches about 5% of the gross domestic product. And we have a zero failure mission. We do not compromise in safety with whatever we do. If safety is compromised through possible interference in the L-band or other possibilities, we won't fly. If it's not safe, that's not something that we're willing to do, and that comes back to the end passengers through delays and cancellations and the normal nightmare stories you hear at the airport.
Well, to speak from all of the weather perspective, L-band is used really by the latest generation of NOAA's geostationary weather satellites, known as GOES-R. And it's really used for basically a few different communications applications as it relates to those weather satellites. First, near 1679 megahertz, so basically weather focuses on really the right side of the L-band neighborhood. L-band is used to relay information in real time, particularly from ground-based sensors like stream gauges, buoys, water level gauges in basically ocean as well as Great Lakes ports, as well as mobile sensors used specifically by wildland firefighters who predict weather conditions near basically wildfires, largely to preserve the safety of really those firefighters. And so this is federal spectrum, which we're talking about here, basically, particularly talking about 1675 to 1680. But even though it's federal spectrum, because it's used by really these federal weather satellites, they are used extensively across numerous sectors and numerous parts of really the economy. Certainly federal agencies that rely on it daily are NOAA, NASA, DoD, and specifically all of the US Army Corps of Engineers, USGS, EPA, but it's also used extensively by local and state officials who are frequently the emergency managers who then have to notify people about especially pending floods. And this has been a particularly big factor as it relates to hurricanes, etc. And so, and then certainly a range of organizations rely on this organization, as well as private sector weather companies who then provide you all kinds of updates via your smartphones. And by real time, in terms of real-time relay of basically information, I really mean real time. And in the most difficult conditions. For example, say during basically Hurricane Harvey, which hit Houston in 2005, it was one of the slowest moving hurricanes, which meant that it sat over Harris County, which is the main county of really Houston, for an extended period of time, making some of the most historic flooding ever. I personally know a number of the flood managers that are based inside of Harris County, and they relied on the real-time data, which came specifically from the various different stream gauges. And that was their lifeline of information, specifically related to where to then lead evacuations. And so to get down to the details of really what we mean by real time, we think that we need 99.9999% uptime. That is something that any average ISP cannot do today. And that is why this specific data relay really matters when really emergencies strike, and particularly with hurricanes and floods. And so And so looking back at really the L-band up here, though, you'll see that basically AWS-3 hangs out way over on the right side. At the time that NOAA was developing all of its GOES-R satellite system, it was determined that there was a need for spectrum to really support all of the needs of all of the AWS-3. And so at that time, NOAA said, okay, we will give up half of our spectrum inside of this space, basically 1695 to 1710, and they handed that over specifically to be auctioned under basically AWS-3. And so NOAA sometimes gets a bad rap for being like, oh, don't get on our spectrum. Well, the thing is that they gave up a whole bunch, and they made GOES-R work in less space. And so I think that that's part of the story that really underlies what we're seeing on really this chart.
Thanks all. Super helpful level set for us on the existing operations in the band. I want to be a little forward looking now, and there are a lot of sort of hot topics in the satellite space, right? The convergence of cellular and terrestrial, advancements in weather satellites. I'm hoping you all could sort of put on your crystal ball, get your crystal balls out and tell us what you think the innovations in this band will be in each of your industries in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure, happy to. Iridium, there's a few things. Iridium announced that it has partnered with Qualcomm to develop chipsets that will be used in personal communications devices. So the services that I talked about previously were Iridium devices or used in Internet of Things contexts, but this will give a satellite-based communication supplemental to mobile coverage, so reaching the 85% of the globe that mobile service doesn't currently reach for emergency communications. I think that is probably the most exciting thing, and I know that a lot of other satellite operators are looking to do similar things with similar partnerships with other technology companies. I think what makes Iridium's unique is that we are a mobile satellite service operator. We have an MSS license, and we will be operating that partnership within the contours of our MSS license. I think what happens in the satellite industry going forward and how these services supplement, because they're called a variety of things. There's direct-to-device, supplemental coverage from space. I think the FCC's proceeding is called single network future. You can call it any of those things. How they regulate that on a going forward basis will determine how useful these products are for consumers all over the globe, wherever they might be, for whatever critical communications they might need. And then looking sort of 10, that's probably hopefully 5 years out, we have policy decisions on that for sure. And maybe 10 years out, we're looking at newer constellations and additional new services. I mean, I can say from Iridium's perspective, we have a large and growing consumer base, and with our 9 megahertz, we're always coming up with new products and services that can be used by consumers, commercial users, national security, and so I think, depending how these policies are made will make a huge difference in what services are available to consumers in 10 years.
Absolutely. I wanted to first start and just emphasize how much policy matters in the innovation space. In the GPS world, 2 transformational and consequential policy decisions were made by the President of the United States. Presidents of the United States. In 1983, President Reagan signed an executive order meaning that the signal would be free for civil use. President Clinton in 2000 eliminated selective availability. Essentially, this is simplifying it greatly, but the accuracy of the signal for civil and commercial use is similar to the signal for the defense uses. Unleashed innovation. Some of our member companies heard about that free signal and said, I can do amazing things thanks to these free signals. And they are employing people around the country and around the globe as a result of the technologies that they have spun up due to these policy decisions. As far as the next 10 years, watch this space and Pun's sort of intended there, but I'm excited. Our companies are investing internally in a great percentage of R&D. They're trying to create new advancements in their existing receiver technologies, and they're trying to create new markets with new technologies. That is really exciting. They feel so confident about the future that they are investing internally. But also venture capital and other investors are investing in companies that have GPS-driven technologies at the heart of their business plans. One you may be very familiar with is the micromobility market, where you'll see all kinds of scooters and bikes and everything else out there. Part of that business plan relies on that signal for it to find. It's delivering people from these major infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, things we're all aware of, metro stations, et cetera, to the last mile to their home, to where they're meeting friends for dinner, et cetera. So this is a really exciting opportunity, and the investments are being made both within companies and in the venture space as well.
So aviation for decades has always been land-based navigation. I remember back when I was a flight instructor teaching my students how to fly an NDB approach in a dark, stormy night by pushing the head or dragging the tail was kind of the saying we used to have. Not very human factors friendly technology. And over the last 10, 20 years, the aviation industry has been shifting over to more GPS and space-based navigational systems. This is allowing for not only increased safety, but increased capacity in the national airspace system. We only have so much airspace to fly, and with the public flying more and more and more and more cargo being shipped, we need to figure out the best way to meet the demands on the airspace system. There's several different technologies that are out there right now. From the increase in route GPS airways, you may have heard of that recently. There was concern about delays going down to Florida this year as there were last year, and they were able to open up 69 new en route airways down to Florida along the East Coast, which is done through GPS technology. We have different types of approaches. As I was saying, we used to have the push the head, drag the tail with NDB approaches. And now we're seeing more and more GPS-based approaches at airports. And the performance on these, we even have special authorization, what we call required navigational performance approaches, that have incredible accuracy and incredible safety margins that we're seeing appear at more and more airports that are allowing for us to get more aircraft into the airports with the same level of safety. On top of it, these systems are just more accurate. With the land-based navigation system, they're subject to a lot more errors, a lot more failures, and a lot more issues that you end up seeing through delays and cancellations of flights if we don't have the ability to navigate into an airport. And the GPS and L-band is allowing us additional opportunities to do that and to meet the 21st century when it comes to aviation.
Similarly, I would say that weather satellites are really undergoing some major rethinking and major new development, both on the government side in terms of the core sort of weather satellite infrastructure, which is crucial to all of our nation, as well as certainly a great deal of private sector satellites as well. And so what does this really mean? It basically helps to improve the quality of the information which gets to federal weather forecasters, but that's just the first step. You know, it then means that there is better data and better information to inform a whole range of weather-dependent decisions. And then to certainly add to that, there is also a whole weather industry, which is then fueled by really the public goods, which are really invested by in terms of government, in terms of our national weather forecasting infrastructure. Let me talk about weather in a way that we all think about more as really citizens, though. Over the past 20 years, 20 years ago, we used to have, certain forecasts in in terms of we used to be able to confidently forecast forward 3 to 5 days in terms of like you could be pretty confident that you'd know the temperature and what would be going on for really the next 3 to 5 days. But really over the past 20 years, that same level of confidence can now be transferred to 7 to 10 days. That's a major advancement in terms of 3 to 5 days versus 7 to 10 days. In terms of being able to really have a realistic outlook, particularly if you're in agriculture, particularly if you're in transportation, in terms of thinking about really the long term in terms of planning, especially because if you can plan better, it saves you money. And so what is mostly attributable to like why did that increase in basically weather forecasting skill happen? Something more than 90% of it can be attributed to better technology on weather satellites. And the thing is that then speaks to the value of the diverse spectrum which is relied upon to be able to operate those satellites. But then specifically, really the L-band, largely because information, specifically from all of the L-band, particularly related to ground-based sensors, is really crucial coming out of that area right around 1679.
Thanks. I want to level us up a little bit and talk about how the U.S. government can better coordinate spectrum. I think we have an interesting cross-section of folks here who interface with any number of agencies. So I'd really be interested to know, and I don't know if I dare bring up C-band on this panel, but we've also seen NTIA seeking comments on a national spectrum strategy. I'm curious if any of you are interested in weighing in on how the FCC and federal agencies can better coordinate the use of spectrum. Any takers?
I think we heard from Rogers, Michael Trier, who came, and he was talking about coordinating between NTIA and the FCC and how critical it is. We've both mentioned how important an interference-free environment is for the uses that we have. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Iridium, we use 9 megahertz, as I said. I know I said that part, but we use that for both uplink and downlink. And having an interference-free environment is critical for commercial uses, national security uses, safety uses. And so it's really important that the FCC, when it considers policymaking in the spectrum arena, talk to NTIA about what the federal government's uses of that spectrum are. The coordination needs to be open and transparent, and we need an establishment of processes for sharing highly sensitive information, and the keeping of highly sensitive information needs to be the rule as an exception to the typically open and transparent process, which we have not been seeing in my experience more recently in the policy-making decisions for spectrum policy, and it's concerning. It holds back the industries because it prevents certainty in the regulatory environment, and that uncertainty makes it harder to predict for future products and services that our innovative companies that are up on the stage today are trying to rely upon for all sorts of uses that could come down the pike in the future. So it's really important, and I think you've heard about it so far, but it's something that we focus on a lot in our advocacy.
We too applauded the MOU between those two organizations. We thought it was the right way to go to bring about that transparency that she's speaking of. We also provided a response to the request about the national spectrum strategy, and I thought I'd just highlight some of the opportunities, concerns, and some of the solutions that we offered in that filing. Certainly you can read in greater detail there, but we really think that this strategy is an opportunity to endorse policies that protect GPS systems that operate within the L-band and GPS technologies and services as a result of that. As always, our concern is that that new spectrum use case licenses shouldn't result in degradation or harmful interference to the incumbent users that are operating in those areas. Our solutions that we provided, first of all, I want to highlight two of them. One is that we're suggesting a spectrum zoning approach, like technologies in similar areas, so that they are aligned near each other. And then the second solution that we put forward is one that was actually supported by the National Academies of Sciences. I forget the E and the M is medicine, right?
Engineering.
Engineering, thank you. It's to use a carrier to noise power density ratio, a metric of 1 decibel, and to evaluate harmful interference. Just to give some context to that, 30 decibels is a normal person breathing. So 1 decibel speaks to just how extraordinary those GPS receivers are in pulling out a signal that's coming from 12,600 miles to space down to the ground, and those systems are powered by the sun. Being able to pick out all of the information from that signal, process it, and turn it into something that a user can use is an extraordinary feat. And that's why we're very concerned about the levels of interference and why we recommend a 1 decibel ratio to be used.
Our ask from the Airline Pilot Association would be for better coordination among federal agencies. We make changes in aviation on a very conservative basis because we have such a high level of safety, and that is what we are trying to continue to achieve. We would also ask that the Federal Aviation Administration be given an opportunity to better evaluate aviation safety with changes within the spectrum. We are all partners in aviation safety. When you go to the airport, you want to make sure you're able to get on a aircraft as worry-free as you are today, and that's what we want to ensure can still continue.
I think that speaking from really the weather perspective, I would say that I consider myself a member of the weather enterprise, and the thing is that a lot of people outside of our world are like, what are you talking about? Well, it is largely because actually the National Academies of Science called out really all of the weather, the broader weather community back around the year 2000, saying, you know, all of you need to work together better. And we took them very seriously, and we have created this sort of ad hoc entity that's really called really the weather enterprise for the government, private sector, and basically, you know, academic sector to really work together and consciously meet every single year to talk about some possible friction points. And there have been plenty of friction points between like National Weather Service and AccuWeather and various different things. And the thing is that that's been a really productive way to really work through our things. However, it's taken a solid 15 to 20 years to be able to make that happen, but it took some very consistent effort. I think that similar efforts could certainly be helpful inside of other communities as it then specifically relates to spectrum. I think that particularly related to weather-related spectrum is that what we're often talking about is access to federal spectrum. And as that relates to really FCC and basically NTIA, frequently when FCC is basically like, oh, so how do we deal with X and such spectrum? They're like, oh, well, that's federal spectrum. We should just ask basically NTIA. But the thing is that NTIA doesn't traditionally ask, other than the most recent national spectrum strategy, sort of, so like, how do you rely on federal spectrum? Well, those uses are diverse, and so many of those users don't even know that they're using federal spectrum and certainly don't know about a national spectrum strategy process. And so I think it's really, really incredibly important that particularly on issues of federal spectrum, that basically FCC recognize just how broadly a lot of that spectrum is used beyond just federal agencies. And the disputes between federal agencies are often not representative of the other users and certainly the beneficiaries of that use.
Let me just echo that. My cousin's husband is a volunteer firefighter, and the way that he finds out about a fire is he has an app on his phone that says there is a fire here and it is X number of miles away and here is the fastest way to go. he doesn't need to know that there's spectrum policy behind it. He doesn't need to know that the disputes are there. He just needs to be able to rely on this so that he can join the other firefighters that are out there trying to save a house or a home or people. And I think, thank you for saying that. That is exactly it. And I really think a lot about him as he's doing his work that way.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind as we jump into some of the nitty-gritty here of the Legato Order and how it could affect operations in the L-band. As I think most folks know, for decades, the L-band has been home to satellite operations that live in a satellite-only neighborhood. All of these L-band services share a common theme in that they would experience harmful interference if terrestrial operations were introduced into the L-band. So let's talk about that harmful interference and the threat posed by the FCC's Legato Order. We just passed the 3-year anniversary of the order last week, and everyone on this stage joined nearly 100 signatories on a letter to mark the occasion. So what is at stake here?
Yeah, so I think this is a great example of good and not good spectrum policy. So, what we've been talking about all along, or at least in the last question answering, we were talking about evidence-based policymaking, taking the facts that are in front of you and applying it to make good policy. In this case, that was lost between agencies, among agencies, within agencies. It's unclear exactly how. I wasn't part of that. They can speak to the history probably Renee the best, but I can tell you from reading up on it myself that that's how I see it. So effectively, we're a neighborhood. I mean, we all live on the same street. We have children, or maybe we have dogs, and we like a quiet neighborhood, and it goes to like good zoning policy as I see it too, as a lawyer. It's like they put a huge music venue right in the middle of our street, and we have the potential for cars to be parked on our lawn, music at all hours. It's just not going to work to put that into the neighborhood, especially where we are. You can see Iridium's 9 megahertz is only protected by a 1 megahertz guard band from the Legato uplink, the nearest Legato uplink. That's just not sufficient. So, and when the Legato Order came down, the out-of-band emission standards were from 2005, far outdated and certainly not applicable to the type of use, the millions of users that they propose to put just a megahertz away from where we are. They would bleed into our 9 megahertz. It's not an issue of us bleeding into their portion. They're bleeding into ours. So we are an incumbent, and the FCC's purpose in good spectrum policy is to protect the incumbents and allow for new uses of spectrum that don't harm the users of that are already within a band, and that's exactly what the Legato Order did. So, it also, just to go to some of the history that I can mention, this was a historic decision. I think this was the only time that NTA requested a stay of an FCC order. The FCC denied that stay, but there were over 20 parties that petitioned for reconsideration, and that is still pending, even given the recent NAS study, which I think we'll get to in the next question. So I'll pause there and let others speak to what this means. But what's at stake are all of the critical services that we've discussed, and them potentially being interfered with at very close proximity to any of the Legato emitters.
Absolutely. I'll just echo everything she said. And I hope that some of the examples that we provided you emphasize that the potential could be catastrophic, a potential loss of life or livelihoods. And that is exactly what we are concerned about when we see something like this coming forward. I mentioned how sensitive those GPS receivers are in pulling out that very faint signals and making it usable for folks. Something that emits something so much more powerful in an adjacent spectrum. Really, we have seen evidence that there will be interference, and that is something that we're worried about, and that's why we continue to talk about how important these particular signals are to livelihoods and life.
So in aviation, we are trained to trust our instruments. We're trained to trust the information presented to us on the aircraft, which is why we have such stringent standards on aircraft certification. There is no indicator, no light that says there's an interference or some kind of anomalous operation that lets us know, which is one of the dangers with it. To echo, yeah, we're concerned about the potential loss of life, but to look at it the other side, some of the technologies that we have saved many lives. The traffic collision avoidance system was mandated in the mid-1980s after several accidents, several fatalities that were pretty prevalent in the national airspace system. Since that's been put in, this uses the L-band, there's not been a single loss of life. The wind shear system, again, this was mandated up until when it was mandated. There were 25, I remember right off the top of my head, close to 25 accidents and close to 500 fatalities. There hasn't been a single one since wind shear avoidance systems have been required on aircraft. TAWS systems are controlled flight into terrain accidents, which we've been trying to avoid. That used to be the leading cause of fatalities within aviation, mandated in the middle 1990s since that's been required, and we haven't had a single loss of life to a controlled flight into terrain accident since these have been required. These technologies work. We trust them as pilots. And when we start to talk about interference, it raises the hair on the back of every pilot's neck, knowing we can't trust these critical safety systems that allow us to do our job safely.
I would say that certainly all of the weather community is very concerned about all of the FCC's decision related to Legato's proposal, which will directly impact SATCOMs as well as GPS. There is a separate proceeding where Legato Networks LLC requested to share 1675 to 1680 megahertz together with NOAA, and specifically to share the area which is basically highlighted there, and that particular proceeding is still pending in front of basically the FCC. Specifically, a number of weather organizations have called on basically FCC to basically reject that based upon the results of basically a study, which we're going to talk about shortly. However, though, we are certainly concerned about all of the Legato decision, which happened 3 years ago, but then there's also a separate proceeding which we are focused on too.
Thanks, Renee. And I'll get into the study. So since last year's NSMA conference, there are two new pieces of information that have emerged. The first is a National Academy of Sciences report that analyzed potential interference related to the Legato Order. And the second is an NTIA SPRESS report that says that the sharing of the L-band between federal and non-federal users carries substantial risks. So first, Kara, can you talk about what the NAS study found? And then Renee, I will kick to you on our NTIA report.
Sure, and I know we're short on time, so I will encourage you to actually read this report. I can tell you that if you're technical in the audience, you'll find it really fascinating. I'm a policy nerd and a lawyer, and I thought it read really fascinating and interesting, just the way they did it and what it comes from. So the NAS report was congressionally mandated in the, I believe, 2021 NDAA. It required an independent technical review of Legato's proposed terrestrial operations to determine whether or not there would be, in fact, harmful interference. The decision, I can candidly say, we were nervous. We didn't know. We asked for this report, but we didn't know what was going to come out of it. I mean, we did our own research, and this is what we believed would come out. But what came out was even stronger and unequivocal than we could have imagined. There is unequivocal evidence of interference. And rather than, I have many bullet points that I could have gone over for this, but I'll just read two quotes from this that I think our other panelists can speak to as well. So in terms of Iridium's potential for interference, it said, the committee's conclusion is that the Iridium downlink will experience harmful interferences at distances of up to 732 meters. The analysis assumes a single user. The situation will be both more likely and more severe as the spatial density of the users increases. We're talking about the potential for millions of users. So this was only for one. And at 732 meters, that is really significant for our uses. On the uses of DoD missions, the report indicates that the terrestrial network authorized by the Legato Order will create unacceptable, harmful interference for DoD missions. The mitigation techniques and other regulatory provisions in the Legato Order are insufficient to protect national security missions. It goes on to discuss that the potential mitigation practices that the FCC indicates in its order are both impractical and impracticable. They are unworkable. They will not solve the problem, and they will come at great cost, and the timeframes for interference with the users in the band will cause potential for all of what we already described in answer to the last question. So it was really unequivocal. I encourage you to read it, and it's really significant for where we are in this proceeding and the steps that need to be taken going forward.
I can speak to the SPRESS study, otherwise known as the Spectrum Pipeline Reallocation Engineering Study of 1675 to 1680 megahertz. Now you understand why we call it the SPRESS study. It was a study that was actually conducted by basically independent researchers, which were contracted specifically by NOAA. But the report was released last year specifically by NTIA following the approval of basically NTIA, FCC, and basically OMB. And so while this study was actually completed back in 2020, it took until 2022 to actually get released. But once it was finally released, I would say that we were largely really the weather community was very pleased and not surprised by its results. It basically said that the proposed sharing of 1675 to 1680 megahertz carries substantial risks. Certainly talking about the points about data, talking about the real-time data relay, specifically of stream gauges, etc. But then also it would cut off some crucial data relays also to private sector weather companies that are crucial partners together with really the National Weather Service, largely because inside of the proposal specified by Legato, they have said that there should not be any protection zones for any private sector players. They would be agreeable to minimal government protection zones, which is really not workable for exactly what I was saying earlier in terms of the broader weather enterprise. It's not just the National Weather Service that really predicts weather. It is very much an academic, private sector, and government working together, and they need to have access to that real-time information. And so overall, in terms of all of this report, now that it has been released, we knew that FCC was waiting to determine what to do with really all of this outstanding proposal. They have decided to start another study as a follow-on to basically the SPRESS study, much to the dismay of really all of the weather community, because we're saying there's evidence right here that we need to reject this proposal. And we sincerely hope that basically FCC does that in the very near future.
Thanks. I have many more questions, but in the interest of time, we have about 5 minutes left for questions. If anyone has any questions for our esteemed panel here.
Thank you. This is very interesting. David Wiley with Widelity. It's obvious it's like an anti-Legato group here. So just if everyone would relax, I would like to understand, is there anybody that can position it such that if Legato were to do this, we'd be okay? Is there a path forward? Is there, how do we get through this? Because if you're on their side of the equation, they made investments, tremendous, and we collectively, the US, FCC, or whatever agencies, have gone in the wrong direction. But is there some resolution? Because as opposed to we're just saying Legato's the big bad wolf, so to speak.
Anyone want to take this one?
I could address part of it, yeah. So from really the perspective of 1675 to 1680 megahertz, I was just touching on it a bit inside of my last answer. I think that, really the weather community wants to figure out a way forward on basically a variety of these issues. Being on the edge of really the L-band, We still see this as very much a satellite neighborhood, and like needs to be with like. However, though, given that we're out on the right side and we did allow for all of the use of half of our spectrum there, specifically for all of the AWS-3, I think that there may be possibilities only if there can be protection zones given to the key partners inside of really the weather enterprise of key universities and key private sector companies to make sure that they have safety inside of a perimeter largely to get those critical transmissions. My understanding is that that might not be sufficient for what Legato needs. However, though, I just know that anything less than that is really going to be a no-go, or else we are really threatening our really overall weather forecasting efforts, and the fact that we need to be improving weather forecasting and not allowing it to get worse.
Yeah, another aspect of this might be that does technology resolve this issue for us in time? It's hard for me to fathom all the advancements that we have in spectrum management and aggregation and sensing capabilities that this can't be resolved. So to challenge it, it sometimes feels like, especially, and I have Iridium background, so I hold Iridium in very high regard, but it's hard for the average user not immersed in these details to understand whether it's a business threat versus really a policy threat or material GPS threat. I have other questions on the GPS front because I do get concerned about our GPS satellites. It's a weakness for our country being taken out, but I don't. That might be another topic. Could we get to terrestrial-based timing solutions and things of that nature? That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably know, if you have an Iridium background, that Iridium tends to get a reputation about holding its spectrum very close and being unwilling to be flexible with it because we have so little and we use it for so much. In response, I think of it not as a competition challenge from an Iridium perspective, because the service that they're offering is not in competition with the services that Iridium provides. They're looking for some sort of what was originally a 4G play and now they call a 5G play, although it's really hard to see how it's a 5G play with this little amount of broken up spectrum, just from a spectrum lawyer's perspective, not from Iridium's perspective, I can say. So, one of the things for me, saying that now, not as a competition issue, but as a policy issue, is that I lost my train of thought. Excuse me, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Let me come back to it. But, it's not a competition issue. It's really more about sorry, please come back to me. I'll stop there.
I thought I'd just touch on the GPS vulnerability issue. Absolutely, there are, according to press reports, some concerning activities happening in space. There are concerning activities happening on the ground, too. If you look at how much companies and the government is investing in cybersecurity for nearly everything we do these days. So vulnerabilities are all around us. And certainly we're concerned about those potential vulnerabilities to those satellites for the very reasons that I talked about. But I think it's incumbent upon us to remember that there have always been vulnerabilities, from operator error to something more technical to some nefarious actors. And so keeping that wide spectrum of possibilities in mind, both ground and space. Launch is treacherous. I mean, just getting satellites up there is so awe-inspiring and amazing without actually having something go wrong. This whole business of space is exciting and very dangerous. So keeping that in mind, that broader perspective in mind, I think is something that I'm trying to do, as I am reading all of these reports about the threats to space.
I thought of my point. If I can come
Go
back
ahead.
to me, sorry.
Quickly.
You know, just one of those Monday moments. Sorry about that. So when this was originally licensed, so rather than being a competitive issue, it's really is a policy issue, in my opinion. When this was originally licensed to one of Legato's predecessors, because it's been named multiple things in the past. So originally it was licensed as ATC, which is supposed to be ancillary terrestrial component. It's supposed to be ancillary to satellite service because this is a satellite band. What they did was they then sought waivers subsequent to acquiring it as an ancillary terrestrial component license, ATC license, so that they could use it for a more ubiquitous terrestrial service. So really what it is about, in my opinion, is it's about the FCC adhering to its own previous decisions, because the Legato Order that we speak to is actually a waiver of those ATC rules. So if they had just stuck to the ATC rules and they went back to what it originally was meant for, it shouldn't cause interference as long as the out-of-band emissions is relooked at, because that was based on 2005 data, and they are actually proposing a lot more users than those studies were meant for. So they would need to look at the out-of-band emissions, but it comes back to sticking to your own rules and using the licenses as they were originally intended rather than a bunch of waivers. So that's how I view it, if that helps you.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So I have not had a chance to read the competing analyses about whether the Legato using the spectrum is going to be harmful or not. I just know that there are some competing analyses and tests that are out there. As a person who's had to write and conduct a lot of tests, I know that you can always sort of engineer a test to give you a result that, you know, maybe helps your case a little bit. Has anyone, whether independent or not, looked at these competing proposals and competing or analyses and tests and said, okay, this was a good test, this was a good analysis, or it had some bad assumptions, this test is probably not repeatable, or it is repeatable, to really just sort of say, okay, you've given me an analysis of some sort, but we have really very low confidence or very high confidence because you left this data out, this doesn't seem repeatable, we disagree with these numbers and figures and calculations. Is there anything like that to give us an assessment of those reports? Again, independent or not. Thank you.
So that's really what the NAS report does. The NAS report was independent. It wasn't done by any of the parties. It was congressionally mandated, and it was done by a federal agency. So the idea was that that would be independent. But beyond that, the members of the committee of NAS that reviewed that report did their own independent calculations and verified the correctness of the NAS studies and evaluations. So that's why I say go back and read the report. It demonstrates just how independent it is of either us or Legato.
And just to clarify what basically Kara said specifically about all of the national academies, it is very much an independent entity which is affiliated with really the government, but the whole basis of all the studies that really the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine is that they have an incredibly strict policy around peer review. And so basically, there was a panel composed to put together all of that study. There was a whole separate other anonymous panel put together by basically a group of mostly their academic colleagues, specifically to independently review all of the components of really all of that main study. And that study had both unclassified as well as classified components, and all of them were peer reviewed, which is what makes really the National Academies process, especially coming from a science background, as really incredibly important and incredibly valuable.
We are up on time. Hope you'll join me in thanking all of our panelists for joining us today.
Thank you, Narayan.